Thank you very much, Professor Mairesse. I'm very happy to be with you today on behalf of the European Commission, on behalf of the European Commissioner, Mrs. Vassiliou. It's quite common to say that education and training never was so high in the political agenda of the European Union. It's true, it's new, and it is important. It's true, it was not the case in the so-called Lisbon strategy during the last decade. It was even not the case 20 years ago when education was considered really as a purely national competence. So we see a big evolution. Why? Why? Because in the Europe 2020 strategy, already mentioned by Professor Mairesse and by Mr. Couchou, it's clear that education and training is, how can I say, a kind of key success factor for growth and joy and a nice development of the European society during the 21st century. It's quite common to say that, and I think you are convinced of that. But to have this stress on education and training at the European level is really new. And it is important because the Europe 2020 strategy is a strategy developed at the top level by head of states, not by ministers of education and so on. No, really endorsed by the top level of the political side of the European Union and member states. One reason for this importance is the current crisis. That's clear. And the difficulty for so many people, and so many young people in particular, for having a job. It is as simple as that. So the idea that the education and training system should develop skills and competencies for the labor market needs is something which is a kind of priority for the time being in the European Union. In the education sphere, you have a number of people arguing, and they're right, that education is not only for delivering the skills which are necessary for the labor market. We don't see any contradiction between this priority, which is really the priority for the time being, but also the necessity to develop skills and competencies for personal development, for education by itself. Why? First, because what it is necessary for the labor market in the next decades, I don't know. The labor market is so changing now. The needs from the business are so changing now that we have to develop skills which are about creativity, learning to learn, basic skills obviously, innovation, team building. That's the kind of skills which are requested by the labor market. But it is also the skills which are necessary for being a right citizen, a new European citizen in Europe. So I want to also to pass this message. From my point of view, I don't see any contradiction. You know, the situation I mentioned already, youth unemployment, the situation is very difficult. We have 8 countries, 8 member states of the European Union with an unemployment rate of young people higher than 30%. Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, but also Lithuania, Latvia, Ireland, Slovakia. So you see, and in some countries it's even higher than 40%. So you see the situation is, the short term, really critical. And it's important for the European Union to react very quickly for a social situation which is kind of like a bomb. Mr. Barroso proposed to the head of states by the end of January to send teams in those countries from the European Commission with experts and to discuss with experts in those countries to see what to do and how the European Union can help. Obviously, it's first a responsibility of the member states themselves. But we can see also which kind of advice, which kind of reform, which kind of use of structural funds we can do. And we sent our teams last week to those countries, and they are coming back with some good ideas on how to use, for example, structural funds, social funds, regional funds for education and training to fight against unemployment of young people. It's not easy to say that education is important and education should be a kind of growth-friendly investment in a period of cut in budget in a lot of countries. But that's the message of the European Commission. Innovation, research, energy, education are the four priorities in which, as far as possible, member states, head of states are invited at least not to cut and, if possible, to invest. It's not easy for the European Commission to propose priorities. You can imagine a lot of other sectors which could be also recommended as a priority. But it was really a decision of Mr. Barroso to propose innovation, research, and education, as well as energy as a priority. But if we recommend to invest, if possible, more, or at least at the same level, we have also to recognize that we have to invest in a better way, in a more efficient way. So we say investment and we say immediately reform. Reform of education and training systems to deliver the skills which are necessary for the society and the labor market of this time. Reforming education and training system is not easy. First of all, education and training systems are quite complex. You have pre-primary, primary, secondary, higher education, vocational training, initial, continuous, adult learning, lifelong learning. So in each country, it's a complex scheme. And if you multiply by 27, I have to say for me, it's also quite of complex system to modernize, to adjust. But it's a clear message from the European Commission. It's time for a number of countries in a number of systems or subsystems to adjust to the needs of the society. Some examples, it's not exhaustive, but some examples. One of the first messages is to invest earlier, to invest in early childhood education and care. Very important for growth and competitiveness, because if you don't have at this period, at this age, young people, children already on the good track, you will get 20 years after a lot of unemployed people. It's very important for equity, for the social cohesion of the European society. And again, it's completely new. It's completely new that the European message is you have to invest earlier. Frankly speaking, up to now, the main priorities of the European level for education was higher education. Erasmus, good success. Bologna process, good success. Investment in higher education. And we have to continue, obviously, to deliver the skills which are necessary for the labor market. But the fact that the European Union is passing the message that other sectors, and in particular, early childhood education and care is important. I think it's a strong message. The second message is with the need to focus on the right target groups. I don't want to use the wording migrant or migrant background and so on, but you see, and we know a set of the young population with certain characteristics, and also with a background which is not necessarily the best for developing their talents and their capacity. And we think we have really to focus on those target groups. And I will try to demonstrate in the second part of my presentation that as a European Union, we do our best for those target groups. The third message is about skills, competencies, outcomes of the education systems, which are really relevant for the labor market. Again, it's quite new. It's not easy. It's not completely new because we had the flagship initiative 2 years ago, the agenda for new skills and jobs. But really we are working on that. We want to see what are the skills which are really needed by the business for the next decade. And we launched the European Skills Panorama. We want really to modernize, to adjust our education systems on the long term, but also on the short term, to the shortages and to the mismatches. If I take one example, we know that we have in Europe a shortage of 700,000 of people with computer skills, informaticians and so on, and so professionals. We have a shortage. And we know that in some countries, we have graduated people in those areas which are unemployed. So we need mobility, we need perhaps language skills to help for better matching between what is delivered by the education systems and what it is available on the European labor market. We want to have a better recognition of qualifications and skills in Europe. If we want really a kind of European integrated market of qualifications, skills and competencies, we need also to have some mechanisms for the right recognition, and we are working on that. Not only qualifications acquired through the formal education schools and universities systems or vocational training institutes, but also for qualifications, skills and competencies acquired through non-formal or informal settings. Very important. I was, as mentioned, formerly in charge of the youth policy in the European level. We see a role of the civil society. We see a role of youth workers in your villages, in our cities, to develop, to help young people to develop skills and competencies, and it has to be recognized. And we see also a big effort of companies, of big companies, but also small and medium enterprises, to develop competencies in the setting of undertaking. So this recognition is really, really important. And the fourth message is about the transition. As I said, the transition between the education, the end of the education cycle, and the labor market. As I said, Mr. Barroso decided to send 8 teams in 8 countries. Which kind of concrete output from those missions? Let me take two examples. In a number of those countries, there is a big problem with vocational training. Attractiveness of vocational training is not there. vocational training is considered as a second level of education, which is wrong. It's really important. And we have also a number of countries, for example, in Germany, in Austria, in Denmark, where we have the so-called dual system. For vocational training, I don't want to explain in detail what it is, but it's simply this idea to have a system very well elaborated, in which you have a training in the institute and training and experience within companies. And Italy, Spain, and Portugal, in full respect of their culture, in full respect of their national economic environment, they decided to take the best of these systems to develop dual systems in these companies. Another example, we have the structural funds, which are really important, in particular the social fund, which are really important not only for social issues, but for education, and to fight against unemployment of young people. And we proposed to those countries to reuse or to reallocate or to redeploy structural funds for fighting against unemployment. And we proposed, for example, to use those funding for Leonardo or Erasmus work placements. Because we have a lot of candidates in Erasmus and Leonardo for work placement, but we don't have the budget. If some budget is available from the structural funds, why not using our engineering of placement, of work placement for those young people? That's a concrete example of what we do in this. Europe 2020, at the level of head of states, we have two headline targets, which will be monitored every year by head of state: early school living and higher education completion. They are reasonably ambitious, and we think it is possible for countries to tackle those targets. It's not the case for the time being. If we take obviously the situation now, and if we take the forecast by the member states, it's not possible. Obviously, we are in a period of crisis, so we can expect that in 1 or 2 years it will be possible for those member states with reform and investment to tackle those European targets. Every year or so, we have country-specific recommendations. And last year, for the first time, 16 countries received country-specific recommendations relating to education and training. It was the first time. It was endorsed by the head of state, and they have to report by April, so in 2 months, how they will start. They started to implement reform for tackling those recommendations. It's about early school living, it's about vocational training, higher education, skills and competencies for the labor market. It depends on the countries. But you see that the way that the Europe 2020 strategy is not only a set of nice principles, but also a concrete mechanism for implementing new policies. That's the way we work at the European level, and we have also our financial tools. I mentioned already the example of redeployment of the structural funds. I would like also to mention the programs for lifelong learning and the next program for education and training, which is proposed to be called Erasmus for All. Again, it's a proposal of the European Commission to increase the budget of this program by 70%. You could say, you could argue, how is it possible to increase the budget of 70% in this period of national cuts and in this period of almost everywhere for posterity. It's a decision of priorities. The general budget, which has been proposed for the next period by the European Commission, is almost a zero growth budget. But in this budget, it has been decided to be coherent and for innovation, research, education, energy, really to propose something to do the difference. Obviously, there are some other areas with negative priorities in the proposal of Mr. Barroso. So we will see. We are in the negotiation with the Parliament and with the Council, the Member States, for the preparation of this new program. But you see the coherence of the approach. Now, I would like to say a few words about the social dimension. It was mentioned, smart, sustainable, but inclusive growth. I don't want necessarily to repeat what we know. You know that we have a large part of the population which is still in situation of poverty. You know that sometimes education systems, not only they don't help, but perhaps could make things worse. I mentioned already early school leaving. In some member states, it's more than 40% of early school leavers. So you see the European target of 10% for some countries is really a challenge. Let me perhaps in this part of our strategy, the social part of this strategy, perhaps just to mention some principles and also to describe how we develop our actions. On the principles, we think it is important for member states to shift resources and opportunities towards those who need them most. And in particular, public investment. There will be certainly in the next decade a debate about funding of education. The role of public authorities, the role of private investment, the role of business. So we consider that for the different subsystems I described before, investment is really an issue, and the way to invest it should certainly be a debate at the European level. But for young people and people really in circumstances with difficulties, really we consider that's a responsibility of public authority to put the priority on them. The second principle, there is no contradiction again between efficiency and equity in education system. On the contrary, that's quite important because there are sometimes this idea that if you want to go in a nicer school, you have to avoid a school where you have a lot of diversity. It's simply wrong. It's simply wrong, and it's not me saying that. It's demonstrated by a lot of research, a lot of evidence. And we have to convince that efficiency is not against equity, on the contrary. A third idea is that education cannot solve all problems by itself and alone. Sometimes we are requiring too much from education. Education should be is part of the society, and we think that a number of difficult issues, like early school leaving, for example, it's a really difficult issue, there is no miracle solution. Such a kind of problem should be dealt in a cross-policy approach with education, employment, migration, health, housing, justice, and across sectoral approach with the civil society, with enterprises, education, and the different actors, parents, family, which are so important. So we want really to promote this cross-policy and cross-stakeholders approach. And finally, the last principle is that we need strong evidence. If we want really to develop strong policies, we need strong evidence. And it's not so obvious. I mentioned already the different subsystems, 27 member states. If we want to go also to the candidate countries, immediately it becomes quite complex to have the evidence of everything. But I consider that as really important. So in this global framework, what we do? We decided not to deal equity issues in education systems only at the level of big and nice principles. I would say all the principles are already on the table. If you take the conclusions of the Council of Ministers of May 2010, everything is there. But in principle, what we want to do is really now to implement a number of actions in the different areas. The first, already mentioned several times, early school living, so important for everybody. We proposed a recommendation to the Council of Ministers to be adopted. It has been adopted. In this recommendation, the Council recommended to all member states to define a global strategy against early school living in each country by 2012. So we are close to that. And those strategies should respect the principle I explained before. Secondly, we propose for the first time to act at the level of early childhood education and care, as already mentioned. And a working group with member states has been put in place to see why it works in a country, why it doesn't work in another country, what are the best practices, how to see the way to have this kind of early childhood education and care really, really efficient. We developed the Bruges communiqué, which is a communiqué in Bruges during the Belgian presidency regarding vocational training, attractiveness of vocational training, quality assurance in vocational training. Very, very important, as I mentioned before, for equity issues. Just a few months ago, we proposed a communication called Modernization of Higher Education. And if you look at this communication very carefully, you will see that the question of equity are really considered as important. For example, the question of tuition fees. That's a real issue, and we have done a number of proposals in this area. Adult learning, just an action plan has been approved for adult learning. Adult learning is a drama in the European Union. We have a benchmark, and we see that the participation of adults in training is decreasing. We are far from the benchmark, and it is decreasing. It's amazing. So we have really in this period of aging society, and when we see that we have 80 million of adults with low skills, we have really to act on that. And finally, the last example I would like to take is the Roma. The Roma dimension, because it has been decided after the events of last summer to have a European approach regarding Roma, and education is obviously an important part. So you see, we try to go in each file, in each sector, in each policy, to put concrete actions regarding equity in education systems. I would like to conclude. Our intention is beside this equity dimension in education as I have just described, to be realistic, to take into account the Europe 2020 strategy, to use the Europe 2020 strategy as a political tool to develop education and training systems, to reform, to invest, and to guarantee equity. We want to be realistic in proposing to the country realistic recommendations and to act through our policy tools and our programs and our funds in the different sectors I have described. And finally, we are absolutely convinced that there is no contradiction between efficiency and equity in our education system. Thank you for your attention.